Uh, Hello, everyone. This is Marvin Cunningham with Long-Stanton. We're getting ready to get started here with our Dissecting the Chinese Model, What You Need to Know About Making Money in China presentation. Before we get started, I just wanted to run through a couple of things. Number one, please turn off your microphones if they aren't already turned off. That way we don't get feedback through the system. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in on the side control panel at any time. We'll get to one or two of them during the course of the conversation, and then save the majority of them towards the end. To get started here, we're going to just run through a couple introductions. My name is Marvin Cunningham. I'm the president of Long-Stanton Asia. I moved to China in 2005 to set up and run our metal stamping and metal fabrication facility over there. I lived there for 5 years and now live in Middletown, Ohio, although I'm still responsible for our Chinese operations as well as do consulting locally for companies looking to do work in China.
And I'm Dan Cunningham. I'm the sixth generation president and CEO of Long-Stanton Manufacturing. We make simple to complex assemblies out of metal, rubber, and plastic. For example, we used to make the Kenner Easy Bake Oven, and we also make the triggers that go in gasoline nozzles. When you fill your car up, those triggers that drop down, we make those. I started going to China 9 years ago, and we started the factories that we own there 7 years ago, and delighted to be here this morning.
And my name Pei?
Good morning. My name is Pei Zhang. Well, actually, in China, nobody calls me Pei Zhang because Zhang is my last name. It always comes first. But anyway, I come from China, and I have been living in the States for a little bit more than 10 years. My practice primarily focused on the cross-border transaction between China and the U.S. All right?
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Turn the page. Is that you? Here we go. Excellent. We want to start off with some general conditions where we see China at today. The first one here being rising wages. Just a couple days ago, there was an article in the Shanghai Daily talking about in the last 9 months, minimum wages in the major Chinese East Coast cities have risen on average 22%. For me, this is really the first time I've seen a number that is related to reality and to what I've seen with our businesses in China. 20% a year is pretty much where we've been at. For the past 5 or 6 years. It's a constant issue, especially with skilled labor for our businesses, welders, machine operators, things of that nature. General office work, it hasn't been going up near as quickly, but certainly rising wages is a major issue for companies looking to go over there and something that needs to be planned for. High inflation this year. Really, inflation's kind of taken off again in China. It's been a problem off and on for the last 20 years with laws in between. Currently, we're at about 6.1% with I think it was a 3 or 4 year high. It was hit in August of this year. July and August, right around 6.5%. It's slowly coming down, but the tightening measures that the Chinese government is taking is having an impact on the rest of the economy. High turnover is another issue that companies like ours have to deal with quite a bit, especially in the East Coast regions. A number of 20% is what I generally hear from companies operating, at least in the Shanghai Yangtze River area. I'm not quite as familiar with that down south with what the turnover rate is. I've heard numbers ranging from 10 to 30% a year from that area. But I know in the Shanghai region, especially younger people, people that haven't settled down yet and gotten married and had a family will switch year to year jobs, and it causes quite a bit of issues for people. high borrowing costs. This is one of the side effects of higher inflation has been the Chinese government increasing interest rates. There's really two different banking systems currently in China. You have your official banking system, where interest on a loan will run anywhere from 6.5% to 15%, depending on your basically ability to borrow and how much of a risk they see you being. But there's quite a large black market now, and some estimates as high as 50% for black lending, some as low as 5%. There's really not very good numbers on this. Even large publications like the New York Times and the Financial Times in London will differ by a factor of 10, but the interest rates there are much, much higher. 25 to 75% a year is what most people see. And I've seen one published number of 100%, although I think that's probably an outlier. Uncertain regulatory environment is also something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. You just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring in terms of how things will be enforced, whether locally or on a national level, or what's going to be the next main issue that the government's going to focus on. Light manufacturing leaving coastal areas. This is kind of a location deal. More and more light manufacturing have been leaving places like Guangzhou over the last 2 to 3 years. It kind of started with the toy industry in 2008, but it's moved on to a lot of things like jeans and textiles and things of that nature. It's definitely something that people need to keep in mind when locating a facility over in China. Then, of course, even though some of these earlier ones have been negative, growth in China is still 9.1%. It's the fastest growing major economy, and probably will be for quite some time. And I pay?
Yep. Well, if you guys have read this month's Time magazine, you're going to see on the cover it says the China bubble. We are counting on China's growth to serve the world unless its economy blows up first. So in one of the articles in this issue, one of the writer actually talked about one of the biggest challenges in China is the real estate, the overheated real estate. The housing prices in big cities like Beijing or Shanghai, they have risen so high that many of the residents there simply just find that many properties become unaffordable. They have to travel very far away or buy houses in very far away. Travel 2 to 3 hours sometimes from home to work. And here's a very popular joke actually in China. A guy works very hard, like after years of hard working, finally had money to buy a apartment in an area which he thought is the suburban of Beijing. And at the day he got the keys, he was so excited, he almost cried, and he wanted to, make a phone call to his family to share his happiness. And so he turned on the cell phone, and there's a text message saying, "Welcome, Hebei province welcome you." Well, Hebei province is next to Beijing, which is about at least 2 hours from Beijing. So it is just a very popular joke in China, which reflecting the very high price in housing price in big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, or any other major cities, especially in the coast areas. So the Chinese government trying very hard in the past few years to cool down the price, but I guess probably many of you have already heard what has happened over the last weekend. A group of homeowners in Shanghai, they protested in one of the developers, that one of the sales offices in downtown Shanghai. They demanded for a refund because the developer apparently slashed the price by almost 30%. So, but it's hard to tell how it's going to impact on the GDP, because after all, much of China's growth is still fueled by the real estate projects and the government's investment in infrastructures. The last piece of item I want to talk about is the growing middle class. Well, generally the middle class in China, they earn more than 100,000 RMB a year. It accounted only for like about 1% of the total population, but it represents nearly 10% of the urban disposable income. So the global they buy luxury goods. They travel a lot. Abroad, and this class is concentrated in big cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and the East Coast. So it's very easy to serve them. Many global companies have focused on serving these new urban customers, and actually many of the international big companies have found that they don't even need to significantly change their product offerings or the business modules to succeed in China because of this emerging middle class. And it is forecast to expand to about 700 million people by 2020. So it's a very potential good market for a lot of international companies. All right.
I was just going to add, business partners that I've known for a long time are definitely very interested in real estate in China. A lot of them seem to be drawn to it, and I observe that it's difficult to tell you're in a bubble when you're inside of it. But the saying that I hear now in China is all I need is 10 years. The idea that they can get 10 years of big growth and then sell it at the top, that seems to be where a lot of business people are in China real estate. And we do have a question here. We're getting a question: is there any union activity that we need to know about?
What I've seen, well, first of all, everyone in China work-wise, in theory, belongs to a union of some sort or another. But from actual on-the-ground experience, and at least for a smaller size company, it's never been any kind of issue for me. I do know several people that have had their local union officials show up at their factory and be like, hey, I'm representing these guys and I want XYZ in terms of for them or what have you. But I can only really think of one example where that's been an issue for people that I deal with on a daily basis.
Okay. Go ahead. Page?
Yeah, page. Moving right along. DNA of businesses that are doing well in China. And here I wanted to focus on just a couple of things, starting off with brands, companies that are doing a good job in China. Probably number one in terms of that I'm aware of is KFC. They've been in China since I do believe 1987. They currently have right around 2,300 locations, and they're opening one location a day. The key to their success has been that they take what they offer in the U.S. and they make it Chinese. In the morning, instead of offering biscuits, they'll offer rice congee. They change their dishes in such a way that what you would see at a KFC here in the States has really nothing to do with what they sell there. However, they've been very successful in changing their business model in China to go to local taste. In terms of tying a brand into or going along with a brand to build a business in China, Henny Penny, based here in Ohio, is a company that makes a lot of the cabinetry, fryers, things like that behind the counter at KFC. They've done very well first exporting, and then they now have a factory over there just going along with KFC's growth. They've been able to, every time they open a store a day, that means that's a store worth of equipment that they get to supply to KFC. And so it's not always necessarily having the brand yourself, but working with them. De Beers is a company that really has done, in a way, almost the opposite. In China, very few people, even today, wear wedding rings and diamonds and things of that nature. However, De Beers has made a concerted effort to advertise there, knowing that it's a short-term loss leader, but a long-term that the luxury good market in China is growing, and that by getting people the idea that a diamond is forever and slogans like that kind of into the popular consciousness, that in 5, 10, years, when the younger generation is getting married, they're going to look for an diamond engagement ring instead of not one at all really right now. I won't spend much time on Apple. Everyone kind of knows the story there, but it's certainly probably one of the more successful brands in China. The only thing I would mention there is that one of their successful strategies has really been delaying the entry of their newest products into China. The newest iPad, when it goes on sale here in the States and in Europe, is not necessarily on sale there, and it kind of creates a bit of a feeding frenzy, a black market, but it's really helped their business. Mercedes has been successful by really to begin with by getting on the approved list of government contractors for cars, one of the few foreign companies that have done so. So these big black cars you see traveling all over the streets in China, they're on an approved list as contractor to be able to supply those to the Chinese government. And so that's a huge market. The biggest market for luxury cars in China is actually the government. The import duty on a Mercedes, all of which are pretty much made overseas, is 100%. So even with that kind of barrier to entry, they've been able to position themselves in such a way as a kind of a luxury product. The NBA, Yao Ming really got that started over there. It's kind of been an incredible story. Even 7-8 years ago, basketball wasn't necessarily a huge thing, but I have probably half my employees have Yao Ming shirts. They play basketball over lunch break, things like, at least in the summer, things like that. But they've really grown beyond that. In the last 2 years, the top 10 jerseys sold in China, Yao Ming hasn't been among them for the first time ever. 3 to 5% of the NBA's revenue comes from licensed products sold into China. And that's a pretty incredible number, considering that outside of a few exhibition games, they're really, they don't have any teams there, professional NBA teams.
I was going to mention Emerson Electric. Not only are there B2C branding opportunities in China, the Chinese seem very, very brand conscious, and due to the culture. And Emerson Electric has a division called Copeland, and they make the compressors for air conditioners for commercial buildings. And that's a branded product, and that's doing very, very well into China. So if you have a branded product, even if it's an industrial product, if you have a brand that's global, you're going to and you of course have a good product, you're going to do very well. Now the flip side, there's a big opportunity for foreign companies. The Chinese larger companies, and I've talked to the person that runs the J. Walter Thomas advertising agency. They're not spending the resources to build Chinese brands, and that's why you're not seeing so many Chinese brands in this country compared to, say, the Koreans have done a nice job with Samsung, and but you're not seeing that from China. The ones you hear about, maybe Lavino or Haier, those are still not global brands yet. So if so the conundrum is Chinese brands sell very well into China, but the Chinese are not developing their own brands, at least currently. So there's an opportunity for those that want to build brands in China. Pei, do you have anything?
Yeah, and I also want to mention that when you try to introduce your brand or your products to China, make sure that you really understand what the potential customers in China want. Because sometimes you'll be surprised that they just think differently, and you don't even expect that. Well, let me share a story. Very recently, actually last month, a company in this region which manufactures water pumps and has a significant market share in North America. They invited a group of Chinese distributors here to in an effort to explore the China market. Those Chinese, they visited the manufacturer plants, the headquarters. They talked to the engineers. They saw the demonstrations, and after a 4-day visit, the executives sat down with the Chinese group and simply asked for kind of like advice or suggestion or any feedback. And you know what they said, like the top, they said, well, the Chinese said, well, your products definitely have superior performance. We don't dispute that. However, we don't think that we are afraid that your products may not sell well in China because the water pumps look ugly. And apparently the executives were shocked because, I mean, you don't expect to display a water pump in your living room. I mean, they're either buried behind the wall or underground. So why do you want it to be? Why do you care about the appearance of the water pumps? The Chinese group said they all have they are very experienced distributors in the industry, and they said that's just how Chinese customers think about it. They focused on the appearance of the products. So even if the water pump's going to be eventually going to be buried underground, they're going to bury a BMW. So this is just how it's one of the examples, like, you know, maybe some because of the culture difference or something else, the potential customers in China may just think differently. So if you want to make money in China, you definitely need to think about that before you go to China.
Exactly. Think about how you want to position your brand and or tie it into another brand or developing kind of awareness of that. There are a lot of different strategies, but in going into China, it's certainly something that needs to be addressed. We'll move on here to the next slide. Here we go. All right. These are kind of smaller niche markets that are doing well in China. I tried to get a wide variety as I could here for you, and I'll just run through them pretty quickly. Chicken feet. A lot of them come from the U.S. We have a ton of chicken farms, but we don't eat any chicken feet. Whereas in China, most breakfast buffets, you can find them on in all like quick mart type places. UDF will have chicken feet in plastic bags for you to be able to take with you. It's just the kind of thing that we don't use, but they use over there, and it's a great niche market for someone that already has a slaughterhouse to make that little bit of extra money that will put them over the top. Hydraulic bridge jacks. There's a British company that leads the market in just jacks that lift sections of bridges basically onto the platform they're going to be on. It's a very specialized market. But if you don't have it right, the section will fall over and you got to start all over again. So etiquette training, there's a German company that has contracts with several major hotels in China to teach etiquette to staff. So the person that greets you at the Holiday Inn, for example, whether it be at the front desk there or while they're serving you, has been trained on how to talk to Westerners. And there's certainly a growing market for those types of soft services. A little closer to home in Ohio, nuclear reactor access doors. A company down in Cincinnati sells them and services ones in China, even ones that they didn't make and install themselves. A very niche market. I mean, the number of nuclear reactors in the world has to be well less than 1,000, so the number of doors is right around there, but yet they've been around for 50 years and have developed a nice little niche market servicing those in China. Ginseng, both wild, grown in the U.S. and farmed, are the number one supplier of ginseng to China. Very, big in traditional Chinese medicine. Especially wild ginseng is highly sought after. Can go for literally, drug money, tens of thousands of dollars a pound for the most sought after ones. And it's just the type of thing that's a very small niche market, but it's still tens and tens of millions of dollars. For a little closer to home still, our company, we make underground gas tank float brackets, which basically is to make sure an underground gas tank doesn't overflow. There's a small float valve in there, and we make a bracket that goes on there. We've made it since the late 80s, early 90s, and we actually make those parts in the States, ship them to China. The float gets molded on and gets shipped back to the company next door to us. So it goes around the world, but it's a small market and something that we're very good at, and so it makes more sense to buy it from us here in the States and ship it over there and ship it back than to try to make it over in China. And finally, disposable chopsticks. This is something that recently was featured in the Wall Street Journal, a company in Georgia. In China, there's not a lot of trees anymore. A lot of areas have been deforested. A lot of lumber is imported. And Georgia, of course, has a ton of pine trees. And so if you think about all the people that are going out to eat and using disposable chopsticks in China, it's quite a few million trees a day. And there's a company in Georgia that's taken advantage of that and hiring quite a few people and putting them to work, making and packaging chopsticks to send over there. The next one, higher value-added services and engineering companies and pay.
Yeah, the first in the architecture industry. Actually, a company GBBN is a local company here has its headquarters in Cincinnati. It's an architecture firm. Many foreign architecture firms they find attractive, particularly in China, particularly in the green building or infrastructure sectors. So just for example, the GBBN it opened up its Beijing office almost 9 years ago. They first focused on only the residential buildings, and now it's been expanded to the healthcare market. I believe that right now their business in China constitute over 40% of the entire firm's revenue. So that's just like one of the examples, like how foreign architecture firms are doing very, very well in China. Law firms, I don't think that I even need to mention that. I mean, there are just so many foreign firms, including FPT, are doing very well in this sector because we like the firms represent U.S. company or foreign companies to explore the China market, and on the other side represents Chinese companies or even Chinese governments to it's a like new trend. It represents the China side to explore the foreign market. So these are definitely two high value services that are doing very well in China. Marvin?
Yeah, another area of high value-added services is kind of engineered solutions equipment providers. And by this, I don't mean a commodity type thing where you sell a stamping press, for example, and that's pretty much it. It's where you kind of go in and we have a problem we need solved. And you send people in and they look at it, and whether it be two of the big industries that I know are logistics, is very high growth right now in China, as well as food and food safety. These are the type of things where, for example, in 2008 there was a relatively large scandal in China having to do with melamine in milk, and especially in infant formula, because when they turned milk into powdered milk, it concentrated melamine, and something like 300,000 kids in China became sick from this. Well, in response, the increase in food safety and investigations into additives and things like that into food have really been increased. So, for example, companies that can go into a dairy and say, here's how we're going to set this up so you won't have this problem and this liability, can charge much larger amounts than just someone that can go in there and say, hey, here's some dairy equipment for you. That'll be, $10,000. The same thing true for logistics and logistical kind of services, to be able to go in and say, rather than go in and say, I'm selling a conveyor system or I'm selling racks or something like that, to go in and say, we are going to design a system for your product so it flows in smoothly, it goes on the shelves so you don't have a lot of inventory, it gets out to your stores just in time. Those types of services where you might end up only selling 30% of the value of the order is in the machinery that you provide, but 70% of it is in the engineering, the knowledge, the know-how, in the training, the value-added services afterwards, the software updates, things of that nature. In the industrial sector, this area is probably the largest growing one in terms of a sector. Software. Traditionally, software is something you think of being is copied and pirated basically in China, and certainly that's very true for things like Windows. It's for $2 or $3 you can buy a copy of Windows most places in China. However, there are quite a few proprietary systems that do very well in China. One is POS systems, which point of sales for things like restaurants, for small stores, things of that nature. These types of systems, they break down all the time. I mean, that's just the nature of them. All of a sudden, if you're in a restaurant, they can't run the credit cards, that system's broken. And you need people that are knowledgeable to come in and fix that and fix it really quickly. So it's not just selling the software in that circumstance. It's selling the software and then the computers go with it and then the follow-up service, normally 1, 2, 3 year type contracts. And this is a very large growing area. Same thing with accounting software. Probably the number one question I'm asked out of everything, other than, how do you like living in China, is what kind of accounting software do you use? It's something that I never would have thought that would be a major question, but it is for people that are looking to go over there. And accounting software is something that is it's a huge industry. And then for software, again, industrial controls, all different types of industrial software, stuff that's custom built for this process, this machine, is highly sought after and very profitable. Then, of course, medical and the medical industry is really booming in China as more and more disposable income is available to people. One of the number one things they spend it on is health-related things. Some of them have to do with lifestyle diseases that are starting to appear there, like diabetes or heart disease, cosmetic surgery. If you get into most cabs in China, you'll see some kind of advertisement hanging off the seat for a facelift or something along that line. And then, of course, to go along with all that, medical equipment and the aging population in China. By 2050, I think it's going to be something like 45% of the population, I think that's the right number, will be over 60 years old. Now, that's a huge number. Currently, it's much less than that, but even in the next 10 years, they're expecting an increase of 5 to 6% of the population over 60. So the caring for the aging, the nursing homes, the things of that nature are becoming a bigger and bigger part of the medical industry there.
I've gotten, we make medical devices in Ohio, and so always we've had interest in working with Chinese companies to have their products brought to the States, but I've gotten many times Chinese medical device manufacturers are saying that they're able to get the approval in China so much more quickly and efficiently that the thought of getting approval in the States is so cumbersome and so little value add that many of them say they're going to ignore the United States. They think the Chinese market for medical devices is much larger. I don't totally agree with that, but I understand their drift. But there is an opportunity if we can get our regulatory environment in place. There's a huge opportunity for a lot of ideas from China to be used here in this country.
Yeah, so basically, if you can figure out for your product, what is your high value add part of it and really focus on that. It might be that you make this widget, but the service that goes with that widget is really more valuable overseas. Is something to really think about when looking to go overseas or to improve your operations over there. Pei?
Yeah, moving to the next slide. Well, we can also take a look at the potential markets in China from a different angle, which is the Chinese consumers' spending patterns. Well, in the past, Chinese tended to delay current consumption in favor of saving for the future. With the rise of the middle class I just mentioned, it is changing. Now we put higher priority on living for the present and devote a considerably larger share of the income to discretionary spending. So in addition to the market of the companies that manufacture basic, like essential products such as refrigerators or phones, stuff like that, are still doing very well in China. And cars is just another, like, one of the new essential products for many citizens or residents in big cities. And but as a middle class grows, new markets are created for Western retailers, hotel chains, and other companies in the service sector. I definitely remember that, like for cosmetic companies like Sephora or any other, like Walmart, they're doing very well in China. The IT industry, well, IT is ranked very high among other things for the period of the 12 5-year plan. So the policies and the government measures are very supportive. The IT industry in China right now is facing a very favorable policy environment. Just as Marvin mentioned, the software and is doing very well in China. And other like the telecommunication equipment, and I also want to mention the online gaming, especially the online game. Role play games, RPG games. If you opened up a Chinese website, I think in most cases, a online gaming advertisement will pop up on the screen, and it is so popular among young generations, and I guess maybe everybody in the young generation has a favorable online game. I remember the other day I watched a TV interview. A very young CEO, Chinese CEO, was interviewed on that program, and he was asked where did he get the first first investment, and he said, well, in the college he developed a online game platform, and upon graduation he simply sold it. And when he was asked how much he made for selling for that platform, he said multi-millions of RMB. So it's just like if you're in that industry, is definitely a booming industry in China. Healthcare, well, Marvin already spent quite a amount of time talking about healthcare. Well, the healthcare reform in China and the government multi-billion commitment to the reform and the rising living standard all contribute to a very attractive market in China. And the U.S. companies will particularly find it very attractive because of the high-tech equipment, the drugs, and also the supplementary dietary in China. Marvin?
I had a question come in. And this would be, the question is it correct that foreign law firms cannot have a for-profit subsidiary in China?
It is definitely not correct. Well, it is definitely not correct because, well, you have to form a Chinese entity in China as a subsidiary of the law firms, and then you can definitely make money out of it.
Oh,
okay, good.
All right. Moving on here. Right here we just have a couple of different business models. This is not at all like the only ones. It's just kind of general idea in terms of how you would actually structure a company that you would set up in China. So I'll kind of go through these here. The first one is selling into China rather than exporting. And what I mean there is more and more companies are building factories, R&D centers, things like that focus specifically on the Chinese market. It's not for export back to the U.S. or Europe or something like that. We are going to build a factory in China that is going to make something specifically for the Chinese market, whether it be a lower cost version of what we currently make, whether it be something that's entirely different. I know Frito-Lay does quite a good job with their chips over there. One of my favorite ones was cucumber flavored, but there's shrimp flavored, and there's one that's spaghetti flavored, if I remember correctly, that are in the store. And these are kind of things that you don't see here at all, but they've basically taken a potato chip and put the flavoring to more of a local taste. In China, generally speaking, in the summer you eat something that's cooler, like a winter melon or a cucumber, and in the winter you'll eat something that's hotter. So they'll even sell chips in kind of like a seasonal. And I can't think of anything here that's really seasonal. There may be barbecue chips with football, but something along that line. Another model is selling directly into China and skipping manufacturing altogether, especially with larger industrial components. Building a factory in China now might not make as much sense as it did 5 or 10 years ago. That the labor structure has changed. If it's something that you only putting in 10% labor anyway, most of it's intellectual property or purchase components and things like that, it might make more sense just to pay the duty and the VAT, which are substantial, generally speaking, you're talking about 28% or so with them combined together, increasing your cost from your factory door, plus shipping, of course. But that might be cheaper than making a multi-million-dollar investment in a factory in China, or even less than that, especially to kind of test the market. And then, of course, selling to China, or selling from China to a wide variety of countries and regions. This is kind of one of the other kind of major patterns we've been seeing over there, is that when people build factories for export now, they're not just looking at, hey, we're going to export back to our home company in the States and they're going to sell our product. It's, we are going to take our Chinese facility, it might be our second or third or fourth, and we're going to use that to service areas that is very difficult to service from our home markets. And that might be Southeast Asia, it might be India, Australia, other parts of the globe where just shipping it from the States might be difficult to get to. There's quite a bit of that, but not too many factories are being built anymore just to supply the U.S. or the EU. It's, we want to try to hit up the east coast of Africa, and to supply that in the Middle East, we're going to do it from, outside of Wuhan or something along that line. It's just, it's changing quite a bit. And we've also seen a decline in the traditional 50-50 joint venture, U.S. company, Chinese company type thing. And really the reason for that is, I think the number is something along the line of 4 out of 5 don't work. Over 5 years, they end up being dissolved or changed, or one party buys out the other. They just haven't been working. And really, we've seen more of the situation where U.S. Partners will partner with a U.S. or a European company, basically a non-Chinese company, if they're looking for someone to partner with to reduce cost. It might not necessarily be someone even in their industry, but someone that can help, if they already have a factory there, or if they don't, they both go in together and share costs, share overhead. When you're first getting started, do you really need a full-time accountant? Should it be nice if you can share that overhead with someone else? And those types of things are much more popular now than just going and finding a Chinese company that's in your same industry and buying part of it, or having them starting a joint venture with you. Dan?
I have a question here. Could you comment on from a geographical, technical, logistics point of view, in regard to natural disasters, potential hazards? Are there some concern about natural hazards or disasters, like what is happening in Thailand with all the rain and so on, that you need to be concerned about doing business in China?
Well, I think that's a concern anywhere. It's not just China. I mean, the new Madrid Fault's only a couple hundred miles from here, and when that goes again, we'll have problems in this area. But there certainly are, areas in China, just like in the U.S. We have California that, subject to earthquakes and landslides and wildfires. In China, Sichuan province, there are always earthquakes there. Every 10, 20, 30 years there's a major one. The Yangtze River certainly floods from time to time. When I was there about 6 years ago, I remember, being up to, throughout all of Changzhou, it was basically up to your tires, for about 2 days. It's certainly a concern, but it's something that you can research relatively easily compared to some of these other things. You might have concerns about being downriver from the Three Gorges Dam because you don't trust its construction, and that's certainly, a legitimate concern. But all along the East Coast is subject to hurricanes and typhoons, and it might be 10, 20 years, just like with Katrina in the States. We didn't have a bad one for 10 years, and then bam, you have a huge one that comes. And Shanghai is kind of like New Orleans. It's a couple feet above instead of below sea level, but that's about it. And if a major hurricane, category 4 or 5, went straight up the Yangtze River, I'd imagine they'd have a lot of the same problems that New Orleans did. I know recently in Tianjin there was a typhoon that hit, and a brand new chemical plant hadn't actually been started. It was about $1 billion, and the water came very close to overlapping the dikes around it that they just built. There was a lot of protest from people living nearby saying that basically, if this had been operating and the water had been a foot or two higher, it would have flooded the plant. It would have caused a natural disaster with chemicals everywhere. And that plant has been shut down and moved. I don't think it ever operated for a day. $1 billion investment moved someplace else. So.
Okay.
All right, we are going to move on to a little bit different part of our program here. We were going to have some survey questions. Due to technical difficulties, we're going to have to ask people to kind of take the survey themselves. If you could...
Get your pencils out,
yeah,
if you
exactly.
would, kindly, and we're going to go on to the next slide here. Okay.
No, there's actually no slide for this. They were going to come up, but I'm going to go ahead and read out the first question here. These will be multiple choice, so just pick which one you think is correct. And the first one is, how much has China's personal income as a percentage of GDP changed in the last 12 years? A, is it 30%? B, is it 15? C, is it 10? Or D, is it negative 15%?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, definitely. How much has China's personal income as a percentage of GDP changed in the last 12 years? A is plus 30%. B is plus 15%. C is plus 10%. And D is minus 15%. And
you may want to write that down on a piece of paper before we give you the answers. It might surprise you.
Yeah. All right. Go to his first graph. The answer to that one was D, negative 15%. A common perception among a lot of people thinking about China, certainly people that don't work there very much, is that everyone in China is making more and more money all the time, and that's not necessarily the case at all. As you kind of see from this graph, especially since the Asian financial crisis in 1998, the Chinese income as a percentage of GDP has been steadily declining. It's something that the government is obviously well aware of, and they're in the next 5-year plan. They're making a concerted effort to turn that number around. That's part of the reason why they've raised incomes. Income being the minimum wage in China at 22% this year, is to kind of get more money into the hands of workers. That being said, it's like turning a boat, or a super tanker. You can't do it very quickly, and so this is going to be something that, especially companies looking to sell consumer products into China, if people are making less money as a percentage of the overall economy, where is that the money that they're supposed to be spending on all these brand new consumer products going to come from?
This is a very interesting chart to me, because this is completely opposite of what your intuition would say. When you go visit particularly the coastal cities in China, they're full of people. I've been going to China for almost 10 years now, and you can really see people are out spending money at all the luxury stores, far more than I see in this country, America, frankly. But yet this chart is telling us income as a share of GDP is actually going down. So that gives you pause to really dig into what's really going on China, and some of the earlier slides give you some clue. But I find this completely opposite of what my intuition would have said.
All right. Our second question here is, how much do you think Chinese consumption as a personal spending as a percentage of GDP has changed in the last 12 years? Plus 70% is A, B plus 50%, C plus 30%, or D minus 20%. And I'll go ahead and just read that again since we don't have it up on the screen. How much do you think Chinese consumption as a percentage of GDP has changed in the last 12 years? A is plus 70%, B is plus 50%, C plus 30%, and D is minus 20%.
And the answer is?
The answer is D, minus 20%. And we have another chart here, courtesy of the Wall Street Journal. Again, spending as a share of GDP. You have, at least I certainly had, for a long time, a perception that people in China are, spending more money than they ever have before. They're buying apartments, they're buying cars, they're buying, Fendi and Prada and all these other things. But spending as a percentage of GDP, looking at the whole country, that number has been steadily declining. over the last 12 years. It was right around 46% as a percentage of GDP in 1998, and right now it's right around 36%. Interestingly enough, it's very this last year, 2010. I know on this graph it kind of looks like it, but they actually have not published that number. Or at least I have been unable to find it anywhere that you traditionally find these type of this type of data. I'm not quite sure why it hasn't been published, but it's definitely something that the Chinese government is concerned about, and in the next 5-year plan again is really trying to turn that number around. And for companies doing business in China, again, if consumer spending is dropping as a percentage of GDP, if you're trying to sell something into China, just be aware of that and see where your product might fit into there. This also kind of demonstrates that the economic growth you've been seeing in China, we've been seeing in China, has been really driven by investment and the government rather than consumer growth, which generally speaking in the Western world it's consumer driven. All right, we now have our third survey question here. What do you think China's personal savings rate as a percentage of disposable income is? 40% of disposable income, 30%, 20%, or 10% of disposable income? And I'll go ahead and read that again. What do you think China's personal savings rate as a percentage of disposable income is? 40% of disposable income, 30% of disposable income, 20% of disposable income, or 10% of disposable income? And the answer to that is 40% of disposable income. The savings rate in China is massive, and part of the reason that a lot of economists and people that follow government policy over in China think that they can continue the growth over the next 5 to 10 years is that the savings rate is very high, and that this provides a large amount of funds basically for people to go out and start spending. The argument being that once the government institutes more social programs, things that kind of the social safety net that we have in this country for Medicare and for pensions and things of that nature, that people will start loosening up their purse strings and really start spending money. Now, that makes sense, but in my opinion, it's also kind of a dangerous assumption. A lot of this money is not necessarily invested in bank accounts, although certainly a very large number is, especially for farmers and people with lower incomes. But the middle class and especially the upper class, a lot of this money is invested in real estate. It's invested in businesses. It's invested in all different kinds of assets that can depreciate very, very quickly. So where 40% of this money is being saved, when it comes time to sell that asset and spend it on something else, is that really going to be there? Remember that in China, even if your money's in the bank, you're losing about 3% a year because of inflation. So if the bank's going to give you 3% a year and inflation's 6.1%, you're already losing 3% a year. So if you're a small to medium, middle class or lower class family, your savings is continuously being drained. It's hard to see how the income or the savings rate like this is really going to end necessarily as well as people think it's going to. Just kind of more of a cautionary tale there. There's a story about a gentleman from New Zealand visiting Beijing, and when he was driving through Beijing, he was asking, why are there so many empty apartments? You see all these buildings and they look half empty. What's going on here? And the guy that was with him said, well, those buildings aren't empty; they're storing money. And these apartments are just storing money. And I can't tell you how many people I've met with 4, 5, 6, 7 apartments, especially before they put in the regulations saying you can only buy so many in certain cities. It's a big concern what makes up this savings. It's not necessarily bank deposits. And we have a question.
I have a question here, a comment, but we're being asked that it seems like this savings might be a misleading number, considering that the under 30 generation probably saves much less as compared to the 40-year plus generation. So what the question is there a difference in age as far as the savings, say under 30 or over 40?
That's difficult to say. I have my gut feeling, and then I have kind of what you read about. Like, for example, the Time article that was mentioned earlier. It talks about people in their 20s and 30s spending much more and saving a lot less. But I just don't know if that's really the case, because China's a huge country. So the people that I see in Shanghai and even Changzhou, which is a city of like 4-point-some million people, are not necessarily indicative of the 20 to 30-year-olds throughout the country. And to me, this is kind of like one of those data points where you just don't know, and you can't quite trust the data, but you're suspicious about it. So to me, I think that a lot of younger people are saving quite a bit of money. They want to get that apartment, car, babies, kind of the three big things, get married, those types of things. So I think that they're saving quite a bit of money to get to that. But once they spend money on that apartment, they put a down payment on, they're going to be paying on it for 70 years, which mortgages go that long in China.
You said 70 years.
70 years. Yeah. Now a lot of people pay for cash, and middle class, upper class people just buying cash on spec. But people that get mortgages, the workers that are supposed to be benefiting from all this are getting 70-year mortgages to pay this off. I'm concerned that in 3 or 4 years, if property prices go down, or even later this year, they certainly have started to in some places, that those people will be just like the subprime type lending here in the States. And people in Las Vegas and in California are still suffering. So I hope that answers the question.
And I would just add that, as far as I know, like a lot of my friends or my friends' friends, which are in the 70 year or 80, born in 70 or born in 80, they do have a tendency of spending more than their parents. And when they need to buy a home, apartment to become married, they will simply borrow or get the money, the down payment from their parents. So we have actually a term for this young generation, which is in Chinese 啃老族, which means that when big things happen, they resort to their parents.
And yeah, I think that's definitely true. I have several employees who have bought apartments recently, and I think in all those circumstances, their parents have helped them out. One of the gentlemen, actually, he bought an apartment, and his mortgage is 1,800 RMB a month, and he was making about 2,000 RMB a month. So between his parents' help and whatever his wife made, much higher a ratio. I think in the States it's 30% plus, and you start really worrying about debt for a house. There, it's some of these guys are spending a lot more money than that on it. In fact, a lot of their income. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone here for attending our presentation. Our contact information is up here if anyone has any further questions or like us to contact or talk to them about doing business in China. Please feel free to email or call any of us. We also wanted to let you know that coming up here on December 13th, this time live from Nashville, but we'll also be available on the web. We'll have our next presentation in the series entitled The Next 5-Year Plan, What the Chinese Government is Saying, and What Will Really Happen. We hope you guys can attend, and look forward to talking to you after this presentation. Take care and have a great day.